Hello and welcome to this session of JLF New York. Let me address the elephant in the room right at the outset. I know there have been concerns about this session, some commentary about this session, but I do think that, given that India is there is a degree of political polarization in India. There are competing narratives about India at the moment. I do think that in the spirit of inquiry, in the spirit of engagement, in the spirit of civil dialogue, which is what JLF stands for and aspires to do, I look forward to this conversation and hearing points of view which are diverse and which will only enrich our public discourse and which will hopefully add to our understanding of the different points of view, which is necessary if we are to build up a synthesis in how we see what's happening in India. On that note, let me welcome Guru. Guru Bhai has been an old friend and he's had a very interesting trajectory. The son of a senior Dalit leader from Bihar who was a minister of state in the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government. Guru Bhai studied law in Bhopal, was associated with the Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, was an excellent research scholar at India Foundation, which is when I first got to know him, and is now teaching law in Patna University, as well as wearing this hat as National Spokesperson of India's ruling party. But he's here in a different avatar. He is the co-author of Makers of Modern Dalit History, an important book that fills in a critical gap, I think, in our discourse. And as we wait for Shazia ji, I'll kick it off with Guru Bhai. Guru Bhai, let me begin by asking you what prompted you to write this book?
Thank you so much, Prashant, for this wonderful introduction. And like you said, that how the process of dialogue and engagement is so central to our culture and civilization. You look at our fundamental documents, the Upanishads, they are a product of dialogue between Yam and Nachiket, the Gita for that matter, the wonderful constitution which we have that was deliberated upon, discussed upon, and then we got this wonderful book. And this morning, I was very fortunate to visit the Columbia University, and Columbia inspired Dr. Ambedkar in so many ways. He recounts his experiences with John Dewey. So essentially how debate has been very central to our culture. And like you said, this book, Makers of Modern Dalit History, when we see Dalit literature, it's on the extremes. And we thought that maybe as a drop of water in the ocean, we tried to identify icons, the people who have made supreme sacrifices, have left an indelible mark, come from the subaltern, come from the marginalized communities, and somehow we realized that they were not recognized. They were not given their due. It was very difficult to find them and identify them in the books of our history. Someone like Rani Jhalkari Bai, who fought and showed exceptional courage and valor with Rani Lakshmi Bai. So why was she not documented? Her contributions was so deep, and then it disturbed us. For that matter, you look at Ambedkar. Ambedkar, to my generation, and I say this with a lot of responsibility, we see Ambedkar, we read Ambedkar exclusively as a leader of the depressed classes. You look at his phenomenal body of work, his work as an economist, his thesis on the administrative finance of the East India Company, which he did here at Columbia. What a wonderful visionary economist he was. His views on foreign policy for that matter. In a speech he was addressing to the students of Lucknow University in 1952, and how he sorts of warns the then Prime Minister that how critical it is to have Tibet as a buffer state between India and China. And in a way, he also alerts the then dispensation that, saying that if Mao had any faith in the principles of Panchsheel, he would have treated the Buddhist in his country differently. So there are so many facets, there are so many aspects to someone like Baba Saheb Ambedkar. And icons like Babu Jagjeevan Ram, K.R. Narayanan, Dakshayani Velayudhan. Dakshayani Velayudhan, friends, the only Dalit woman member of the Constituent Assembly, the assembly that drafted the Constitution of India, world's largest democracy. So in a way, our agony was that the Dalit literature maybe had not done justice to these icons who made supreme sacrifices for their culture, for the civilization and the nation.
Guru, you speak about Baba Sahib. And we have seen in recent years a conscious attempt by your party and the government that it leads to remember Baba Sahib's legacy. The Prime Minister has invested a lot of political capital and energy in remembering the 5 sites associated with Baba Sahib. There was a parliament session to commemorate the Constitution. But do you think there is a fundamental tension between your party's worldview and Baba Sahib's worldview? In Annihilation of Caste, he does speak about the destruction of Hinduism and the destruction of the Hindu social order as the pathway to the liberation and the way to address the caste question. You operate within a paradigm where you seek justice within the Hindu social fold. How do you reconcile this tension with Baba Sahib?
Prashant, I don't think it's a tension in a way, because it's a social churning which is going on. Even Ambedkar, for that matter, he chooses a path of Buddhism. And Buddhism is an Indic faith. He did not convert to any of the Abrahamic faiths, and he has written extensively about it. And speaking of the tension, I'm sure all of you are aware that for the first time in the history of our country, we have a woman from the Adivasi Samaj as a constitutional head of state. We have one of the most powerful prime minister who comes from a backward community. So I'm sure because of the social structures, there will be problems, but the sort of representation, the sort of dignity, the sort of social justice initiatives that have happened over the last 8 years, for that matter, if you see the President of India, the Draupadi Murmu, an Adivasi woman, replaces a man from the Dalit Samaj in the Rashtrapati Bhavan. So that is a phenomena. Dalits, the subaltern, the socially backward, the marginalized, they see a reflection of themselves when it comes to someone like Draupadi Murmu or Ramnath Kovind. And definitely, as far as the contributions of Dr. Ambedkar is concerned, Dr. Ambedkar made phenomenal contribution, but his contribution were unacknowledged. It took the dispensation in power more than 4 decades to give him a Bharat Ratna, the top civilian honor. It was a non-Congress government at the center that gave a Bharat Ratna to Baba Sahib Ambedkar, supported by the Bharatiya Janata Party. So necessarily what we see, what we read, there is a reason that elections after elections, the party, the government in power, it's getting validation. And obviously, the pyramid, the social pyramid, it's getting deeper. It's the deepening of democracy which we are seeing. So I don't necessarily see, when you say that there is a fundamental conflict or tension, there are struggle. I'm not denying that. Caste remains a problem. I'm here to acknowledge that. As someone with a lived experience, when I see news of atrocities, of killings which is happening, it disturbs me to the core. But at the same time, we must also read the positive side of it. A Dalit president, a Dalit Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. There is a movement in India, you are aware, Prashant, it's called DICCI, Dalit Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which has given a lot of avenue to the Dalit youngsters. Now the Dalits want to be job givers, not job seekers. You look at the initiatives, I can go on and on about the Swachh Bharat Mission, the Awas Mission, Har Ghar Nal Yojana, and so on and so forth. But the idea that the tension is there, but at the same time, the integration and the harmony, it's now at a historical level.
That's a good segue for me to ask you my next question, which is about the relationship between Hindutva and the issue of Dalit justice. Now, Hindutva is a movement that has been traditionally upper caste dominated. The Sangh has never had a non-upper caste Sarsang Chalak, if I'm going to put it that way. The BJP has been traditionally upper caste dominated. You did point to the efforts towards inclusion that have happened. And while researching my own book on BJP, I was struck by the fact that the BJP has won the highest number of reserved seats in 2 elections in a row. The BJP has the most number of Dalit MPs, the most number of Dalit MLAs in the country. So I'm not taking away from that representation, which to a certain extent the party now encapsulates. But is there a tension between that worldview of what is seen by critics as Hindu upper caste supremacy and the aspiration of Dalits to find a space within this structure?
That's an interesting question, Prashant. And you see, the three fundamental documents of our culture, of our civilization. Mahabharata, it was authored by a Dalit. Vedvyas, he was not an upper caste. Ramayana, Valmiki, not an upper caste. The Constitution of India, again authored by a Dalit. So the three important fundamental texts of Hindu Dharma is authored by a Dalit. I agree when you say that there is definitely some sort of exclusion which is happening, but you look at the faith and commitment. I come from Bihar. There is a very important festival called Chhat. Majority of the people who are doing Chhat, which is a most rigorous fast, 2.5 days without food and water, you would know, they are Dalits. The Kanwad Yatra, you do an academic social profiling, you would realize they are Dalits. There is a community, friends, in Chhattisgarh in central India, the Ram Nami Samaj. The Ram Nami Samaj, they were denied entry into the temples. What they did, they inscribed the tattoo of Ram all over their body from head to toe, and they said, if you deny us the entry, we'll make our body our own temple. This is the level of faith and commitment. Dalits have been essentially the cultural Sanatani soldiers of Hindutva. Dalits are more Hindu than upper caste Hindutva. There is no question of that. There is absolutely no question of Dalits being excluded. Obviously, I agree when you say that there are instances of exploitation and discrimination which cannot be denied. And I am not at all subscribing to this idea of caste blindedness or caste denialism. But at the same time, the narrative which I see, I have been here since the last couple of weeks. The first question was asked to me was, how would you distinguish between a dharmic Dalit and a non-dharmic Dalit? I was surprised. Non-dharmic Dalit is an oxymoron. Like I said, Dalits are more Hindus than upper caste Hindus. You look at the Saraswati Puja, you look at the Durga Pujas, Dalits are constructing the biggest pandals in Patna and Calcuttas. So we have to accept that. You look at Ram Nami Samaj, obviously there has been some incidents and there has been some incidents of conversion also that has happened in the past, but at the same time I don't see it happening. About the party which you said, that how party has sort of cultivated, you have to realize, Prashant, that there has been only one occasion when a person from the Dalit community has become a national president of a national political party. It is the Bharatiya Janata Party, and that person from Dalit background was Swargiya Bangaru Lakshman. So today, you have a Dalit president, you have a tribal president, you have a Dalit national president within the political party, you have the highest ever members of Dalit community in the Council of Ministry, you have 3 Dalit women in the Uttar Pradesh Council of Ministry, where Yogi Adityanath is chief minister, and the sort of narrative which is ongoing, it disturbs me to the core. The community sees this. The community is now aspirational. The community is now assertive. You can no longer befool them. They can see a reflection of themselves when it comes to the organizational hierarchy of the party, when it comes to the organizational hierarchy of the government. You look at the topmost parliamentary board to our district, Panna and Mandal, it's socially diverse and reflective of our social realities. And you think Dalits can't see them? Dalits can see them. And obviously 2014, 2017, 2019. In 2019, the present government, the present party got 4 crore more votes than 2014 for that matter. So these are some very critical insights, some very critical arguments based on facts and evidences, which a lot of us discount when we form our opinion about the current dispensation or the country for that matter.
Is there a tension between the traditional upper caste structures and, as I acknowledged, the greater Dalit space within the party? I mean, how is that process going? And I don't ask this in the spirit of interrogating you, but in the spirit of understanding that when you are trying to create a more inclusive formation, there is often tension between those who have had entrenched interests and domination and newer groups and newer leaders who are trying to seek space within the same structure. How is the party dealing with that tension?
Prashant Ji, I would not have given this example, but since not in the spirit of integration, but I think I must put this across very candidly that I come from the Dalit community and I'm the youngest ever national spokesperson any political party in India ever had. Youngest ever national spokesperson of the world's largest political party from the Dalit community. Specifically, I think my articulation, my research, my statements, that is something you can obviously assess me with. But from the level of national spokespersons to the level of national president within the party, when it comes to dignity and representation in the government as well, like I said, we have to acknowledge the fact that for the first time we have a woman from the Adivasi Samaj as the constitutional head of the state. But unfortunately, it's not being spoken. A lot of my friends in the US said, oh, your prime minister is a Savarna Hindu. They're not aware. He comes from a OBC background. So if you look at it, the diversity of institutions, and that is there to see for everyone. So I necessarily don't see this conflict.
How do you see political formations, Dalit political formations, which in the last 2 or 3 decades became very powerful forces in Indian politics? I'm thinking about the Bahujan Samaj Party, for instance. And there was a push, especially by Kanshiram, to create an autonomous kind of Dalit politics. What you represent is Dalit politics integrated within a national political framework and a national political party. How do you see the future of Dalit politics? As an autonomous kind of, will that stream and strand remain powerful, or you see this, or do you see that stream weakening and greater integration happening?
See, we must understand that, good that you spoke of Kanshiramji. Kanshiramji gave the slogan of Bahujan Hitai. And you see, the word Bahujan is borrowed from Vedas. Bahujan Hitai, Bahujan Sukhai. And then again this argument comes that there is a conflict between the Hindutva pyramid and the Dalits. You look at the leadership of Dalits since after independence. Ambedkar, Babu Jagjeevan Ram, the only Dalit deputy prime minister, Kanshiram, Mayawati, Ramvilas Paswan. The 5 tall Dalit leaders in the post-independence history. 4 of them devout Hindus. Devout Hindus. You go to the memorial of Babu Jagjeevan Ram, you would see a Tulsi. Babu Jagjeevan Ram, and in a sense, I might digress a bit, Babu Jagjeevan Ram, his role as a phenomenal minister of defense in 1971. In the 1971 war, and this is something which is not being acknowledged by us. Henry Kissinger, the great Henry Kissinger says that the most hawkish defense minister, Gary Bass, written a book called The Blood Telegram. He has acknowledged the role of Babu Jagjeevan Ram. So the point which I'm trying to make, you look at Kanshiram, you look at Babu Jagjeevan Ram, you look at someone like Mayawati ji, Ramvilas Paswan ji, they're all devout Hindus. Ambedkar also chooses a faith which is an Indic faith. There were indications that a lot of approach that was made from the Abrahamic leaders as well, but he denied them. So the point is this, that today we have a leadership, we have an institution which is definitely sort of negotiating with the Dalit aspiration, and necessarily the dichotomy which is there, I think it's best for the people of India to judge. I think us sitting thousands of miles away, and the Indian voter, I think Indian voter is probably the smartest voter in the world. And as long as we are getting validation from them, obviously, that is something which is a reflection of themselves.
No, I think there is no doubt about the fact that this is a democratically elected, legitimate government with the representation that you're speaking about. Let me step back a little bit. We are in New York, and over the past few years, this country has been witnessing a churn in the politics of race. And there are very strong movements here. The Black Lives Matter movement, of course, has pushed the issue of racial justice at the center of American political discourse. While working on your book, and I'm returning to your book here, how did you think about the question of caste in India and the question of race in the United States? Are there correlations? Are there similarities in the manner of oppression? Are there lessons that both movements for justice can learn from each other? Are there clear divergences?
No, certainly. You see, the Constitution of India, the fundamental document of our nation, it was drafted by someone from the Dalit community. And the story of struggle is something which is fundamentally different. India, the moment we got our independence, we had a constitutional structure of affirmative action. We had special preference for people coming from the marginalized communities in the government-sponsored education and the government-sponsored employment. But nothing of that sort has ever been here in the United States constitutional structure in more than 200 years of history. Obviously, there are some executive orders, but nothing as sacrosanct as a constitutional structure. So obviously, there is much to learn, there is much to get inspiration from, but as we say that the attempts at inclusion, the attempts of social reforms have been very eternal. When you go through my book, you read the story of someone like Ayankali. Ayankali is a social reformer. So whenever there has been problems, our society, our culture, and our civilization always had that space of social reformation. So I don't necessarily see some comparison. And obviously, it's always academically and politically appropriate to learn from each other. And the manner of oppression and everything is very different. Like here, we have had head of states, like I said, for that matter, ministers of defense at leadership positions. The institutions are now becoming diverse gradually. Obviously, we need more. We need more diversity, equity, and inclusion in institutions like judiciary in India, in institutions like media, in institutions like civil society. But gradually, this will happen.
You know, I was waiting for Shazia ji to ask this question, but I'm going to ask you too. What is you talked about representation as an important element of equity. And clearly there has been a lot of progress in terms of representation of backward Hindu social groups, including Dalits. What about Muslims? The fact is that the party, I'm glad to see Shazia ji here, so maybe we will just wait for a moment and welcome her to the stage. The fact that Muslims don't find themselves represented in political structures in the BJP. I mean, no Muslim minister now, no Muslim MP in either house of the parliament, in a state like Uttar Pradesh with 200 million people where you have 40 million Muslims, no Muslim MLA. I mean, that's something that should, as somebody who's concerned and committed to the idea of equity, does that concern you? And where do you see that issue being addressed? How do you see that being addressed?
There is a difference between fact and opinion, I would say. Recently, I think a couple of days ago, we had Ghulam Ali ji from Jammu and Kashmir, a scheduled tribe Muslim Gujar from Jammu and Kashmir, sent to the Rajya Sabha. A Rajya Sabha nomination from Jammu and Kashmir. We have someone like Danish, a Pasmanda Muslim, who is part of Uttar Pradesh Council of Ministry. We had someone like Sikandar Bakht, who's been the founding member of the Bharatiya Janata Party. Array of leaders, Shahnawaz ji, Mukhtar Abbas Naqvi, Nazma Heptulla. I can give you 100 such names. So obviously we must not be in this trap. And obviously for the first time, Prashant ji, we have to acknowledge that since 1952. Since 1952, we have this provision of presidential nominations to Rajya Sabha. The presidential nominations to Rajya Sabha in the art and culture category. For the first time in our history, we had a Dalit artist from Tamil Nadu, Ilayya Rajaji, sent to Rajya Sabha in this category. The previous dispensation, they couldn't find a Dalit in this category. And that is disturbing at so many levels. So look at the civilian honors, look at the Padma's award, look at the Padma Shri, look at the Padma Bhushan, Padma Bhushan. Someone like Haldar Nag from Mayurbhanj in Odisha getting a Padma Shri. Someone like Ramchandar Manji is getting a Padma Shri, remote part of Bihar. So, like I say, when I say representation, diversity, equity, inclusion, it's not a matter of slogan, it's a matter of commitment for each and every one of us.
Thank you so much, Guru Bhai. It's so nice to welcome Shazia ji here. You're somebody who crossed over from my side of the aisle. You were in the media to what we would call the darker side of the aisle, politics. But of course, you were motivated by the desire to change. You've had an interesting journey. You were a part of the India Against Corruption movement. You were at the forefront of protests against the horrific gang rape that happened in Delhi in the last decade, and then which led to tougher laws. You were a part of the Aam Aadmi Party, and then you made this switch to the BJP. Take us through this journey and how it was to switch from one party with a set of principles to another party with maybe an opposite set of ideological principles. Did you feel a tension there, and how was your transition, your broader journey?
So, well, I was on your side. I was a journalist for many years. And as an anchor, I was a TV news anchor. I was quite tired of talking about the corruption of UPA. And that's pretty much all the political reporting that happened, day after day, inundated by news of yet another scam in the UPA 2 government. And I just felt that we ought to do more about this. And instead of, I want to be cause in the matter and just not be there to comment on it on a regular basis as an observer, but to be, and so when the opportunity arose, Anna Hazare movement, it was great. And I had no idea that it would ever become a party. It would transform into a party, and it did. So, well, it started as an activist, from activism. I was part of the Anna Hazare movement. Arvind Kejriwal swore that it would not become a party, so I had no idea. So I'm in politics purely by accident. It was never by default or design whatsoever. I don't think I've switched or changed at all, because I spoke for transparency, for corruption, and I still do. As an activist, as an anchor, as a politician, I spoke for women's rights. My own truth, being a Muslim from UP, and all that came in my way of my education and my search for equity. I would continue to work on those. So the inner core of who you are pretty much remains the same. And what you seek, and your journey, and the anger within you, the angst, and what makes you who you are. So you seek that in different ways. You can have many forms, but the essential core and substance remains the same. So this has been my journey, and this is what has propelled it. So my fight against patriarchy, the need for reform in my community, the need for me to speak for other sisters, not just in my community, but all others perhaps, which is why I'm a petitioner in the new Uniform Civil Code that I'm working towards. So this has been, what I felt, the helplessness and the sense of injustice that I felt as a 12-year-old growing up in Kanpur, in Uttar Pradesh, and you can tell the audience something about that, as to what it represents. In a Muslim household, Sunni household, where my father was a Maulana from Deoband, and Ammi wore a burqa, and every aunt from both sides and all sides wore, and it was really difficult to fight it, the whole bit of challenging the accepted system and to challenge the status quo of what a girl ought to do and ought to think and ought to be. And so I think it's been a whole lot of things. So to freeze me into an identity of just being a Muslim and a woman would be really being very reductionist. There's so much more to each one of us. But yes, on the question that you asked my colleague, Guru, we really need to know this. We talk about political empowerment and representation. It's really important that we do. And you and I were discussing the Rajinder Sachar committee reforms, right? So I've often wondered, so many years, so many other parties, 2/3 of our independent India and the governance and the governments that have led it, how come the socio-economic indices for Muslims have been so skewed against them? Why is it that in terms of education, employability, representation in government and non-government jobs, microcredit schemes, sanitation, higher employment, Muslims were far behind? So let's see, but there was a lot of political representation of Muslims by all those parties who are not called anti-Muslims, So there's something to be said there. And I want to bring to your notice, Prashant, some figures. So look at, when you say minorities, now obviously you're talking about Muslims. But I just want everybody to know that we have many other minorities. We have Parsis, Jains consider themselves minorities too. Many of them do. And we have Sikhs. And Muslims are not the only minority. So, I have never considered myself as a member of a minority. I would rather expand my being instead of reducing it to being just a minority. No, I'm an equal stakeholder in my country's progress. So why would I see myself as a member of a minority? I'm an Indian. I'm also a Muslim. I'm also a woman. I'm also from UP. And these are all the identities that I traverse, crisscross, celebrate, and sometimes not. They come in the way of so many other things. But that's it.
I completely take your point about multiple identities, and my apologies because I, of course, don't want to box you in as only a Muslim or only a Muslim spokesperson of this party. But I just want to take off on something that you said, that we did see in the first few decades after independence in the Sachar Committee report, quite brilliantly documented the socio-economic marginalization of Muslims, and there was political representation which was higher. Have we swung to the other extreme today, where I will acknowledge that there is a revolution in the way delivery mechanisms work in India? It's far less leaky. There are direct benefit transfers, and there is no discrimination as far as welfare scheme goes. I will acknowledge that. And in that sense, there is some socio-economic empowerment. But the idea of equity, I mean, this goes back to what you think about and how you understand equity, also includes representation, also includes an environment where everybody feels safe and secure to say what they want. And there is a perception that under the BJP, that's definitely not the case with Muslims. And there is a perception that there is an erosion in representation, and there is almost an invisibilizing of Muslims from the public space. How would you address that? Is there a balance to be struck between representation and welfare in both?
So first of all, I'd like to say that if you see the figures, that the biggest accomplishment, and there have been many, is that the dropout rate of Muslim girls in schools and colleges has gone down from 70% to 30%. So if this is not empowerment, 40% more Muslim girls, and I say it as a Muslim woman who could have been one of those girls, because one has to fight your own system and your own aunts and uncles and your immediate ecosystem to get out there, and the social milieu that you have to deal with. So I feel very happy that 40% more Muslim girls now go to schools and colleges. And this is a change that has happened only from 2014. Now that itself is huge. I can give you figures. For instance, if you look at any of the government schemes, I mean, if I want to tell you about the housing schemes, you see the percentage of Muslims in the country, and that's a huge number, but much more, not even in direct proportion, but Muslims have benefited from the central government schemes and the various states much more disproportionate to the population almost, because of the fact that they were socially, economically backward and kept so by the other parties for so many years, who just saw them as a vote bank and votaries of power. And I think it just was a ruse to keep them in that position and not to do anything about it. So it's one thing to have a Muslim name there and make him or her a minister. And in India, as you know, I mean, contrary to what Muhammad Ali Jinnah would have talked about, a representative of India or elected MP would have to work for both Hindus and Muslims and all the constituents in the constituency. So you don't have to be a Muslim to work for Muslims. You don't have to be a Hindu. This is how it is. This is how the framework of a constitution has been and designed so by the Constituent Assembly members. It's a mandate of every MP and every MLA, irrespective of what religion they come from, to work for the empowerment of everybody. And that's a rule of law we believe in.
Are you uncomfortable sometimes with the majoritarian rhetoric that emanates from parts of your party and its wider ideological fraternity? The Nupur Sharma controversy happened recently. You wrote a piece in Express where you were quite critical of the VHP, for instance, when it came to the Bilkis Bano case. So I'm asking this as, you're somebody who comes from a liberal, journalistic kind of background, and you spoke about your family background, which I think is very interesting, that you're rooted in the community. So, and the religious traditions of that community. Does that make you uncomfortable?
Well, I think extremism of any kind, and it does make me uncomfortable. More than that, it makes me angry. And I actually oscillate from being amused to being very, very angry. So it's just, we've become almost dumb about it, boxing ourselves all the time. So Shazia Ilmi, Muslim, in BJP, evil. So some other. So it's like BJP bad, Congress good. I think that's very simplistic. I mean, it's very silly. So people must grow up and read more and engage more instead of just believing in this binary. And within the BJP also, there has been so much evolution. the discourse has changed so much from within. And the different schools of thought and different people feel about things differently. So that individuality is allowed to flourish. And I retain that, as you pointed out. And yes, it does make me uncomfortable. Because you can't be bashing up one religion, I mean, both sides. And it makes me very uncomfortable to be out there speaking against hijab and have the so-called secularists speak in favor of hijab and call it freedom of choice. Because I know as a Muslim girl, there is no choice. When the social conditioning is such that everybody around you wears a hijab, then as a 13 and a 14-year-old, you really don't have much of a choice. That's one. Two, it also offends me deeply when I fight for a legislation like triple talaq or the oral pronouncement of divorce, saying it by uttering I divorce thee thrice, if I were to translate it properly. It bothers me that something that is not even a part of Quran is really, and on so many levels, is so disturbing, is actually endorsed by the so-called secularists. So I don't get it. Something that is not all right with one from the point of view of feminism. So there is so much of contradiction with these so-called left liberals, and nothing liberal about them, I dare say. They don't want to speak up. So who will speak for the minority within the minority? Who will?
No,
I choose to do that, and I'm very proud of that.
No, I think the distortions within the politics of secularism have clearly produced a certain kind of backlash, and I think it is important to acknowledge that. But as much as I'd like to monopolize this conversation, I think it's only fair to give our audience the chance to ask you questions. We have about 10 minutes. So if there is anybody who would like to ask Guru and Shazia ji questions, please do come up to the mic and ask. Feel free to ask your questions. I would urge you to keep your questions crisp. We would love to hear your thoughts, but I think your commentary can wait for the discussions offline. Questions, please.
I have two questions. Hello.
Please go ahead, Asha, we can hear you.
I have two questions. One is, four BJP MPs complained about the treatment of Dalits. Uday Raj saying Dalits were tortured after protests. Yashwant Singh said nothing has happened for Dalits. He wrote a letter to the Prime Minister. What do you feel about these kind of comments coming from MPs within the BJP talking about... sorry, I'll just ask my second question.
Yeah, sure. I think that's good.
My second question was to do with general press freedom in India. All global rankings have shown that press freedom and civil society in general is under attack in India. The rankings have fallen very drastically. Most recently, there have been raids on CPR and Oxfam in India. Amnesty International has been asked to leave. So if you can just comment on that. Thank you.
So first of all, Udit Raj, the Dalit MP that you talk about, the person you talk about, was an MP from the BJP in the last term. And he actually turned really hostile because he was not given another ticket for the second time, this time over. And he's no longer with the BJP. That's one. And maybe you would like to say something more about the Dalit issue, that there's ill treatment of Dalits in the party.
I don't think it's correct. And obviously, Udit Raj became a member of parliament when he joined the Bharatiya Janata Party. He was with a separate political party for like decades, and to become a member of parliament in the Indian parliament, it was the Bharatiya Janata Party that gave him the platform. But regardless of that, there are mechanisms within the party, within the organization, that if you have certain concerns, you can obviously express and these concerns get addressed. As far as your question about the institutions, the freedom of institutions is concerned, I think the present Prime Minister has been one of the most vilified Prime Minister for the last 15 years. The amount of abuses which is hurled on him, and then I don't think that when the head of state is being abused left, right and center, being critical and constructively critical is one point, but if you have the freedom to say things about Prime Minister, which anywhere in the world I don't think anyone will have. You just need to go to the social media and you just need to do a basic elementary research, you would get. So I don't necessarily agree with that, sir.
But Guru Bhai, I'll just follow up on that quickly, which is that there are concerns about the larger state of civil liberties in India, and the fact that dissent is not really welcomed, that there is often a crackdown on civil society institutions which may seem as critical. There is either a pliant kind of media, or there are levels of self-censorship that the media has to exercise. I'm not making a value judgment, but I am putting to you this point of view. And so, more than the current raids, how would you think about the larger state of civil liberties, which is essential to the idea of equity, right, where everybody has a voice?
A former leader of my party, Bharatiya Janata Party, late Arun Jaitley ji, and I categorically remember one thing which he said. He said how dissent is the essence of democracy. A lot of our leadership, if you look at the Bharatiya Janata Party leadership, they are product of anti-emergency protest. You look at Lal Krishna Advani, you look at late Arun Jaitley ji, late Sushma Swaraj ji, they were product of anti-emergency movement. So I don't fundamentally agree with this position. Obviously, the status of civil liberties, if you look at it institutionally, I mean, today you have certain ideas, you have certain agenda. Obviously, there is a very robust judicial process in our country. And Prashant, I'm sure you will not dispute that we have a judiciary which is supreme. There is a rule of law. And nothing is beyond the Constitution, nothing is above the Constitution. We operate within the four walls of Constitution. And there have been judgments against the government, against the leadership, against the party. There have been critical commentary against them. So it is more of an opinion than a fact, Prashant, I would say.
Quick follow-up, Shazia.
And because I'm a spokesperson and I've been there for a while, and I've been a news anchor of one of the largest television networks in Hindi, so I know a little something about it. I think press freedom, I think we just have, so much freedom that nobody can complain of the same. I'm there every day. And you almost vilified, and the things that get said, not just about the Prime Minister, but about BJP. I mean, so nobody could accuse the, BJP of muffling freedom. And I want to tell you that I was part of the Anna Hazare movement when Anna, an octogenarian, was thrown into a jail by the UPA government. Nirbhaya Andolan, I know how we were beaten up only because we protested for better rape laws. And all of us were beaten up, and we had to withstand the tear gas shells and on those cold nights. So I don't know what we're talking about. I think people either, I think there's some, one can't, I'm asked these questions and I don't know what to say. Somebody wrote, Shazia supports genocide because she's in the BJP. And I said, I don't know. I think, if somebody is has hallucinations and is in an altered state of being, they need help. I can't dignify their questions and their issues. I mean, because I'm a journalist. I'm not a therapist. I can't answer that, you see.
Please, go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to say I'm so thrilled to see budding young politicians like both of you, Guru and Shazia. And, we welcome you here in the US. We hope you will be part of this, corridor between India and US. I especially want to invite you to Silicon Valley to set up, a deeper corridor on that side, because I find a lot of you guys end up coming to the East Coast but not to the West Coast. So please, you have to be there. The second thing I want to ask you is, Shazia, did I hear you say just now that you might be leading some efforts on Uniform Civil Code? And if so, I'm so proud of you. I think we desperately need that in India. And I know it's a tricky subject. It's a very sensitive subject, but I think it's an important thing for somebody to take on. It's courageous on your part to do that. But please tell me a bit more about why you're doing it and how you might be proceeding and pros and cons of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Asha ji. And I think we're running out of time, so Shazia ji, if you can keep your answer crisp about the Uniform Civil Code.
Sure. Well, I've hardly had any time, thanks to the Uber Blues, as I said. Well, so Uniform Civil Code, when the triple talaq or this legislation took place in India, and I think most of you know about the Shah Bano case if you follow Indian politics. I think it was really important to know, it's important to know that we don't have to just do things for Indian Muslim women, but women across the board, Hindus, Parsis, and that personal laws in India are subject, they are not part of the IPC or CRPC. And when it comes to laws vis-a-vis adoption, inheritance, marriage, and divorce, they are considered personal laws, and they are subject to a different jurisdiction, which could be Sharia, where Muslims are concerned, and respective religions and what they believe in. Which is why it's important to be a robust democracy for all of us to have the same kind of law for all women in India across the spectrum, religious spectrum. And this is not coming in the way of their freedom to profess a religion or mock or humiliate any particular custom, but just for the sake of equity and to do right by the Constitution and what it stands for.
I'll be happy to continue this session, but I'm under strict instructions from the organizers to wrap it up. I do want to thank both of you, Guru Bhai, Shazia ji, for being open and democratic in taking questions and answering what many would see as uncomfortable questions. It is in that spirit of inquiry and civilized dialogue that JLF has hosted this session, and I hope we can continue this conversation offline and in future editions. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Sanjay, Suraj, and the JLF team.